Wayne Madsen, who, of course, worked in the Navy, worked for RCA, the National Security Agency, Naval Data Automation Command. Of course, he's written for some of the biggest national publications out there. What happened with this missile for the last 3 days? On record, there have been a lot of former Pentagon brass, including members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, retired. NASA people have come out and said, yeah, that's some type of sea-launched, either submarine or ship-launched, serious missile, perhaps even intercontinental ballistic, or at least medium range. Wayne Madsen, of course, has the report, China-fired missile seen in Southern California. We appreciate him coming on short notice of the WayneMadsenReport.com. So, Wayne, what's your intel on this from your government sources?
Okay, China's been very aggressive recently in South China and Yellow Seas. The Chinese Navy, people might recall two incidents off the Hainan Island, which is where an underground Chinese submarine base is located. These submarines leave underwater undetected and go back into their underground base undetected. They're not forced to surface. So we had in 2001 the Navy spy plane that had the altercation with the Chinese MiG. The U.S. Navy EP-3 Ares was forced to land on Hainan Island. Last year we had what's called a surface towed array surveillance system ship, U.S. Navy ship called the Impeccable, was harassed off of Hainan Island. This is a ship that detects submarines specifically in that area. Yeah, and what we did with SOSUS, and I have to say, people will say we have the capability now to track submarines. Well, we've curtailed that capability. We used to have a vast array of acoustic hydrophones. We only have two bases left, one at Whidbey Island in Washington State, and the other at Dam Neck, Virginia, and only 5 of these SIRTAS ships, one of which I mentioned was harassed by the Chinese Navy off Hainan Island last year. 5 ships to cover the entire world. In the SOSUS base in Coos Bay, Oregon, we actually had a Soviet Victor 3 nuclear submarine surface 30 miles off the coast, about the same area where it's figured that this Chinese submarine may have launched this missile that actually headed northwest and probably impacted in China, just as a test and also a message to the United States. If you're going to play in our waters, in the Yellow Sea and South China Sea, guess what? We can do the same thing. I also understand that the National Security Agency may have intercepted telemetry from that Chinese missile. So they know, the Pentagon knows, the Chinese have no vested interest in having the public know. All that matters to them is that Obama knew right before he met President Hu in Seoul, and he's going to meet him again in Tokyo at the APEC conference. And that's the only people that need to know. They're happy with that situation, and I believe that, like with the incidents we had between Soviet and American submarines during the Cold War, Obama probably talked to the Chinese president and said, okay, you proved your point. Let's not exacerbate these tensions. Let's keep it quiet. And then it took a day and a half for the Pentagon to start trotting out these newly minted experts, including from the Discovery Channel of all places, people that claim, it was an airplane, a U.S. Airways flight from Honolulu to Phoenix.
Well, Wayne, we've posted the videos in the last 3 days of former generals and experts in this saying it was a missile. So I guess those were people that they couldn't control.
Right, and the editor of Jane's Missile publication in London stated that as far as he was concerned, it looked like a submarine-launched ballistic missile. Now, when I was in the Navy, we had a lot of intelligence sources, but you know what we used as our major reference?
Jane's is the global premier encyclopedia for all things weapons.
Absolutely. When there was a question asked, we would opt for Jane's over even our own Navy intelligence. We figured Jane's was right, and some of our intelligence may not have been correct. So with all that, and of course now we have all these so-called experts coming out of the woodwork claiming, oh no, it was a contrail from a commercial airplane. Well, anyone that looked at that knows that the plume, very, very few contrails look like that. That was actually, you saw the vapor trail because that submarine was fired from underwater. So it was not on the surface. And we've seen, just take a look at some of the Polaris missile shots and look at the similarities. Now we're told, oh, well, there's similar contrails off of JFK in New York and off of Florida. Well, isn't Photoshop wonderful? Because if you look at those contrails, it looks like they took the contrail from off California and superimposed it.
I've watched a lot of Polaris submarine launched, and the plume is a lot bigger at the bottom, and then it goes up and then off at an angle, and that's what all the experts said at the time. Now, there is a lot of Navy missile testing in the past right off the coast.
The Navy and Air Force said that it was not any of their missile tests. They came right out in the beginning and said that. The FAA said that was not a plane that had taken off from LAX or any other airport in the area. So it took the Pentagon, like I say, a day and a half. But I would note that I see a lot of skepticism now from some of the Pentagon correspondents for the major networks, like Jim Miklashevsky with NBC. I don't think he was buying it the other day when he reported the Navy said, well, it was an airplane. But they really have no. Well, I think primarily China wanted to send a message to us. Look, you keep playing in the South China Sea, and Hillary was rattling some sabers about the islands that China claims down there, the Paracel and the Spratly, and up in the Yellow Sea, there's fighting over some islands there
with Russia.
I think primarily this is the Chinese military telling the Chinese government, look, you better take a stand here, because if the U.S. thinks it can play in our waters, we have to demonstrate to them that we can play in theirs. And I think that primarily this was a military response by the Chinese. It was a perfect storm to make a demonstration like that. So I think there's a lot of things that played into this decision. So the Chinese dispatch a Jin-class ballistic missile nuclear submarine. They may have one or two of those. And frankly, we also know that the previous submarines that they had of the same type, ballistic missile submarines, were very noisy. But the Chinese, being such a high-tech power, they know how to quiet these down, just like the Soviets and the Russians were able to quiet their submarines. They had a diesel-electric, as you mentioned, that popped up right in the middle of the U.S. Navy task group about the same time that this incident takes place. It was the USS Kitty Hawk, and the whole purpose of those task forces, the other ships are supposed to protect the aircraft carrier. So obviously we have a problem with our anti-submarine warfare detection capabilities. And also, remember, Rumsfeld's pet project, the ballistic missile defense system, Star Wars 2, they sunk billions into that. And this also shows, well, that money was wasted. So what the Pentagon's trying to do by covering this up is to protect a lot of heads from rolling. When they screw up, they're very good at one thing. They're very good at covering up. I don't think they were very good here, because it took them a day and a half to start finding the newly minted experts.
What are the other Navy people saying you're talking to on Capitol Hill?
Some Navy sources are telling me absolutely it was a test firing of a Chinese submarine-launched ballistic missile. The Japanese intelligence are onto that, too. They've been keeping a close eye on what's happening in Hainan with the Chinese submarines. That's their conclusion, and I think we're going to see more people coming out. I think we're going to see leaks starting to filter out of the Pentagon very shortly. Because
there's people who want to fix this problem, not engage in a cover-up.
Absolutely, because, you've got our Navy ships out there are vulnerable to these Chinese submarines, and obviously we have a problem in our detection capabilities.
I certainly believe he believes what he's saying. All the evidence points towards it. This is a very bold move and shows them way out of their hemisphere, but they see it as their territory because they're on the Pacific, and it fits with the rest of China's military posturing. And remember, this is who owns most of our debt.
Visit Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. When you're on the site, you can also tune in 24 hours a day to my daily radio broadcast. There's also a free iPhone app to listen to the syndicated radio show when and where you want.